Every generation believes they've finally arrived at real prosperity. Conference rooms where economists project endless growth curves treat the future as a mathematical certainty. Shopping districts expand into farmland, construction cranes dot every skyline, and the consensus declares this time is different. This time, the wealth is real. This time, the foundation is solid. But what if the entire structure of modern prosperity functions exactly like something else? Something that requires perpetual recruitment to survive. The uncomfortable truth hides in plain sight. What society celebrates as progress and development operates on identical mechanics to a recruitment scheme. The prosperity people experience doesn't flow from genuine value creation. It flows from finding more participants. GDP growth becomes the metric of success. Rising asset prices become proof of wealth. Increased consumption becomes evidence of advancement. But these aren't signs of wealth generation. They're symptoms of a system that collapses without constant expansion. The question that separates sustainable prosperity from a pyramid scheme is simple. Can it survive without recruiting the next layer? The machinery of progress grinds forward, but underneath the noise, a simple pattern emerges, one that's been hiding in plain sight for decades. Cities reduced to rubble in 1945 faced a choice: rebuild through genuine productivity, or rebuild through monetary expansion. The Marshall Plan established the precedent. Pump money into economies. Measure success by spending growth, not production efficiency. By the 1960s, economic success became defined by year-over-year expansion percentages, rather than actual standard of living improvements. Assembly lines ran at full capacity, but debt grew faster than output. Economists in university halls began redefining prosperity itself. Progress meant growth. Stagnation meant failure. The language shifted, and with it, the entire framework for measuring economic health. Governments discovered a convenient trick. Difficult decisions could be postponed by expanding credit access. Push problems onto future administrations. Let tomorrow's population service today's spending. Policymakers signed agreements that committed future generations to payments those future generations never approved. The pattern solidified through decades of repetition. Each decade required more credit expansion than the last to maintain the illusion of progress. When growth slowed, the solution was always the same. Make borrowing easier. Make it cheaper. Make it more accessible. Never question whether constant expansion was sustainable. Never ask what happens when recruitment slows. By the time anyone questioned whether perpetual growth was mathematically possible, the entire global order had been built on the assumption that it had to be. The structure was complete. The system was operational, and every participant inside it had become dependent on finding more participants to join below them. Credit card applications arrive in college dorm mailboxes before students understand compound interest. By Q2 2025, Americans carry $1.21 trillion in credit card debt, with average balances climbing above $7,300 per cardholder. Credit card companies don't profit from people who pay off balances. They need perpetually indebted consumers making minimum payments while recruiting friends through referral bonuses. Every major purchase now requires pulling forward future earnings through loans. Homes, cars, education, all create commitment to decades of payments. The system doesn't function on thrift. It functions on recruitment into debt. Corporate boardrooms where executives present growth charts operate on the same principle. Companies get valued not on current profitability, but on growth potential. They must expand into new markets, acquire competitors, and increase customer base quarterly. Amazon and Tesla operated at losses for years because investors rewarded user growth, not profit. Growth remains 2.5 times more important than profitability in determining valuation. This is classic pyramid incentive structure. Early participants extract value only if later participants join at higher prices. Young professionals commute 2 hours each way to afford the career opportunity. Entry-level workers earn less than living costs in expensive cities. They're sustained by hope of climbing the pyramid, but each level requires exponentially more people below it. Uber drivers work long hours for low income without social protection. The system isolates individuals living job to job, lacking lasting financial or social connections. Container ships leave Asian ports loaded with goods purchased on credit. Developed nations export debt, treasuries, and bonds, to developing nations. Those nations must grow their economies to service that debt by exporting cheap goods back. Foreign governments hold over 30% of U.S. treasuries outstanding. The development of emerging markets isn't about improving local standards. It's about recruiting new consumer bases and labor pools to feed expansion requirements. Developing countries face external public debt equating to 88% or more of export value. They swap between dollar debt and renminbi debt, but the recruitment structure remains. Suburban neighborhoods where every third house displays a contractor's sign show the pattern in residential form. Each mechanism promises opportunity, advancement, prosperity, but all require the same fuel: more people joining below you than leave above you. Elementary schools in rural Japan convert to senior centers. Between 2002 and 2020, nearly 9,000 schools closed permanently across the country. The pattern repeats itself. 450 school buildings become disused yearly due to declining births. Every expansion-based system assumes tomorrow's population will be larger, younger, and more economically active than today's. That assumption is collapsing. Fertility rates across developed nations have fallen below replacement levels for decades. South Korea's fertility rate hit 0.72 in 2023. Each generation becomes one-third the size of the previous one. Within 2 generations, the working-age population collapses. By 2070, Korea's population is projected to decline by 17 million, representing 33% of its current population. The working-age population peaked in 2019 and now steadily contracts. Immigration was the temporary solution. Recruit workers from regions with younger populations. But those regions are also experiencing fertility declines. Immigration offices process applications from nations facing their own labor shortages. Maternity wards close while hospital wings for elderly care expand. The unspoken truth emerges. The entire modern economy was designed for a demographic reality that no longer exists and won't return. The pyramid needs a broad base of young contributors, but every developed nation watches that base crumble in real time. Open house signs appear on every block. Bidding wars erupt in suburban cul-de-sacs. Home prices rise faster than wages, creating a paradox. Existing owners feel wealthy on paper. This pressure pushes renters to stop throwing money away and buy. House prices grow more than 5 times quicker than earnings nationwide. Housing costs across European cities become unaffordable for 39% of mayors surveyed. Each new buyer requires larger loans at higher prices. They recruit themselves into decades of debt service, while recruiting the next buyer with even less affordability. Property shows, renovation culture, and home ownership propaganda all serve the same function: recruit more people into the system. Financial advisors show retirement projections that only work if markets rise 7% annually forever. Rising stock prices get presented as evidence of economic health, but the growth is primarily driven by corporate buybacks funded by cheap debt, not actual productivity gains. Companies prioritize growth over profitability. Growth remains 2.5 times more important in determining valuation. The 401k system and retirement accounts force workers to become system participants. Retirement security depends on markets perpetually rising, requiring constant recruitment of new investors. University campuses with luxury amenities get financed by student loan growth. University costs rise dramatically faster than wages since 1980, but degrees become required for entry-level positions. Students face the recruitment moment, take massive loans or forfeit economic participation. Student loan debt in the United States reached record levels in 2025, crossing $1.8 trillion total. More than 42 million Americans carry federal student loans. Average borrowers owe around $39,000 each, marking a doubling of average balances since 2007. Student debt creates lifelong system participants who cannot afford to question the structure. They need it to be legitimate to justify their investment. Cryptocurrency conferences where speakers promise tickets to early adopters of freedom replicate the exact structure. Bitcoin advocates mock traditional finance while replicating identical pyramid structure. Early adopters profit only if later adopters buy at higher prices. Bitcoin maximalists need perpetual new converts, or their holdings lose value. Recruitment gets rebranded as adoption. The sole way most promoters realize value from their holdings is through new entrants into the market. Every asset class tells the same story. Wealth grows only if someone after you is willing to pay more, borrow more, commit more. Central bank meeting rooms where officials announce rate cuts call it accommodation. When expansion slows, the playbook becomes predictable. Cut interest rates to make debt cheaper, forcing more recruitment through easier borrowing. Zero interest rate policy from 2008 through 2015, then again from March 2020 through March 2022, wasn't emergency medicine. It was permanent life support for a system that can't survive without constant new debt creation. Quantitative easing gets rebranded as stimulus. Central banks buying government and corporate debt isn't economic support. It's the institution directly recruiting, by ensuring debt markets never close. The Bank of England purchased £895 billion in bonds. The Federal Reserve and European Central Bank purchased $2.5 trillion of government debt and troubled private assets during Q4 2008 alone. This was the largest monetary policy action in world history. Government ministers sign assistance packages with conditions written in footnotes. Every recession meets the same response. Incentivize borrowing. Cash for clunkers. First-time homebuyer credits. Student loan expansion. The 2008 Economic Stimulus Act raised limits on conforming mortgages to slow house price declines. Policy goal isn't stability. It's recruitment. Get more people into debt obligations to restart the expansion cycle. IMF delegations arrive in capital cities with briefcases full of conditional agreements. Loans to struggling nations include conditions requiring them to open markets, privatize assets, and integrate into global debt systems. Development loans function as recruitment tools. Nations accepting IMF assistance become permanent system participants, unable to exit without collapse. Structural reforms raise poverty by increasing unemployment, lowering government revenue, and restructuring social programs. Bank executives testify before committees about systemic risk. 2008 revealed the truth. Institutions weren't rescued because they were valuable. They were rescued because their failure would expose the pyramid structure. The $700 billion Troubled Asset Relief Program authorized government to purchase distressed assets to stabilize the financial system. Bailouts don't rescue the system from collapse. They forcibly extend the recruitment period by socializing losses onto taxpayers, who become involuntary participants. The institutions exist not to end the scheme, but to ensure it never ends. To recruit the next generation of participants before the current one realizes what they've joined. Tech conferences announce disruption of industries that were functioning sustainably. Stagnant wages become the gig economy and entrepreneurship. Precarious employment gets rebranded as flexible cooperation. Unaffordable housing becomes wealth-building opportunity. Unsustainable debt becomes leveraging future growth. Demographic decline becomes productivity gains through automation. Economic forums celebrate efficiency gains while unemployment lines grow. Automation displaces labor but gets marketed as creating new opportunities elsewhere. The displacement effect reduces labor demand and wages, decoupling output per worker from compensation. Marketing campaigns rebrand precarity as freedom. Every warning sign of pyramid unsustainability gets repackaged as innovation, disruption, or evolution. The language changes, but the requirement stays the same. Recruit or collapse. Give the pyramid a new name, and participants won't recognize they're standing at the bottom of the same structure their grandparents entered. Spreadsheets display debt figures with so many zeros they blur together. Global debt hit $338 trillion in Q1 2025, climbing from $324 trillion just months earlier. The problem isn't the number itself. The problem is the growth rate required to service that debt exceeds the growth rate of the global economy. Every year, total debt must expand faster than economic output. This creates mathematical certainty of eventual collapse. The only question is timing. How many more recruitment cycles can occur before the base requirements become impossible? Government promises exceed capacity to deliver. State pension systems carry $1.35 trillion in unfunded liabilities across the United States alone. Social Security's unfunded obligation reached $28 trillion, with the trust fund projected to run dry in 2033. Medicare and Social Security together require either doubling payroll taxes on declining working-age populations or cutting benefits in half. These promises can only be kept if future populations are larger, more productive, and willing to accept lower benefits than current recipients, none of which will occur. Every political faction refuses to acknowledge this because admission would reveal pyramid structure. Mining operations in Congo, where children extract cobalt for batteries, reveal the resource constraint. Expansion-based economics assumes infinite resources on finite planet. Rare earth minerals required for green economy transition are concentrated in regions with declining production capacity. China controls 70–90% of global rare earth refining capacity. Demand for critical minerals will grow 4 to 6 times by 2040 as renewable energy scales. Developing a new mine costs $500 million to $1 billion, taking 10 to 15 years from discovery to full production. The renewable energy transition requires mining and manufacturing on scale that exceeds current capacity, but expansion is required to fund expansion. Coastal cities design flood barriers for storms that haven't arrived yet. Decades of growth achieved by ignoring environmental costs now demand payment. Climate adaptation costs projected at $387 billion annually for developing countries by 2030. For 48 developing economies studied, fighting climate change, protecting biodiversity, and cutting pollution will cost $5.5 trillion annually from 2023 to 2030. Without investing minimum $30 billion in adaptation by 2030, emerging markets face projected damages and lost GDP growth of $377 billion, over 12 times that amount. Attempting to address environmental damage while maintaining growth is like paying off pyramid scheme debts while recruiting more participants. Mathematically impossible. Central banks discovered 2022 to 2023 that money printing has actual constraints. Inflation returned when expansion exceeded real economic capacity. Money growth during 2021-2022 contributed to the surge in inflation. The emergency tool used since 2008, print more money to recruit more participants, now generates inflation that destroys purchasing power faster than expansion creates it. System trapped. Stop expanding and pyramid collapses immediately. Continue expanding, and inflation destroys currency value. The ECB was initially too late in hiking rates, then made up for this through forceful reaction. Printing money invariably causes or significantly contributes to high inflation. Diplomatic meetings where nations compete for investment deals in African capitals expose geopolitical recruitment wars. U.S.-China tension, fundamentally about recruiting same developing nations into competing economic systems. Belt and Road Initiative is recruitment campaign. China offers infrastructure loans to lock nations into debt system. Western development aid is counter-recruitment. The United States outbids China for participation in dollar-based system. Build Back Better World Initiative was conceived to compete with BRI, but commitments totaled only $6 million 1 year after announcement. Both sides need recruitment because neither system is sustainable without expansion. The conflict isn't about ideology. It's about which pyramid gets the remaining recruitable population. Factory floors where robots assemble products for consumers whose jobs robots eliminated show the automation paradox. Technology supposedly solves productivity problems, but automation reduces employment, while system requires maximum employment to generate consumption. If automation reduces need for human labor and wages disappear from large population segments, consumer demand risks collapsing. An economy with endless productivity, but no one left to buy what's produced. Self-driving vehicles, AI, robotics, all eliminate jobs that create the consumers who generate demand that justifies the investment. Pyramid requires maximum participation, but technology eliminates participation opportunities. Irreconcilable contradiction. Pension fund managers review actuarial tables that don't account for declining birth rates. Every participant knows system seems unsustainable, but timing the collapse is impossible, so rational choice appears to be continued participation. I'll exit before it collapses, is the thought of every participant in every pyramid. But mass exit is the collapse. System exploits timing uncertainty to maintain participation, despite obvious mathematics. The numbers don't lie, but the system continues because the alternative, admitting the structure, is unthinkable for those already inside. Financial advisors present retirement plans that assume markets rise forever. Distinguishing between personal financial responsibility and system sustainability becomes critical. Living within your means doesn't fix a pyramid, but it protects you from being the greatest fool. Most financial advice assumes system perpetuity. Invest for retirement, buy real estate, get a degree. All remain valid only if expansion continues. True preparation means understanding what happens when expansion stops, not pretending it won't. The system doesn't collapse all at once. It collapses in sequence, with those at bottom crushed first, while those at top extract remaining value. 2008 demonstrated the pattern. Homeowners lost homes. Banks got bailouts. Executives kept bonuses. The bailouts supported banks but offered little direct help to millions facing foreclosure. Efforts to modify loans reached only a fraction of homeowners. Banks received $245.1 billion in TARP assistance and returned $275.6 billion. The government profited $30.5 billion while families lost everything. Future collapses will follow same sequence. Preparation isn't about preventing collapse. It's about not being first crushed by it. Alternatives exist, but require abandoning expansion as progress mindset. Steady-state economics, degrowth, circular economy models all function without recruitment requirements. A steady-state economy entails stable population and per capita consumption that don't exceed ecosystem carrying capacity. The circular economy advocates designing products for multiple life cycles, so resources get reused rather than discarded. These alternatives will be labeled unrealistic by defenders of current system. The pyramid always ridicules sustainable alternatives as impossible. Individual exits are possible, but mass exit is the collapse. Therefore, share knowledge without expecting systemic change. You can structure finances to reduce pyramid participation through lower debt, tangible assets, and diversified income. You cannot convince the system to reform because the system is composed of millions of participants whose wealth depends on pretending it's not a pyramid. News anchors celebrate job creation while ignoring wage stagnation. Once you recognize the structure, every news headline, policy announcement, and economic indicator reveals its true purpose. Recruit or maintain recruitment. Job growth equals successful recruitment. Rising asset prices equal recruitment advertising working. Interest rate cuts equal recruitment incentive. Immigration debates equal arguing over recruitment sources. The language changes, but the function is always visible once you know what you're seeing. Families review budgets trying to distinguish needs from recruitment pressure. Communities build local trade networks that function without debt expansion. Knowledge without action is complicity. Structure your life to minimize dependence on perpetual expansion while helping others recognize what they're participating in. There is no heroic solution, no systemic rescue. There is only recognition, adaptation, and the resilience that comes from clear sight. They called it progress, development, growth, prosperity, words that mask a simple requirement. Find more participants or face collapse. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. But once you see the structure, you can't pretend it's a foundation. The pyramid disguised itself as economic progress, but recognition reveals what it always was, a system that survives only by recruiting those who don't yet understand what they're joining. That knowledge won't save the system. It might save you. Subscribe for the analysis they'd prefer you didn't hear. The patterns are everywhere once you learn to recognize them.